So Shabbat Shalom and Chag Sameach. I'm not going to be too long. I know people want to get home, and I hope to see some of you in shul tomorrow in person and some of you in shul online as well. Just keep in mind there's services tomorrow 9 a.m. and also on Monday morning 9 a.m. for the first and the second day of Pesach. By now you can have one last bite of bread if you still have in your house, but I think in a few minutes from now, that's it. Any other announcements that we have to make? Okay. So I want to propose an innovation in synagogue worship. I think we should start right away. I think Rabbi Sachs will like this innovation. I want to stop calling pages from the pulpit. No more pages for weekday worship, no more pages for Shabbat worship, no more pages from the Chumash, no more pages for the Torah reading, no more pages for the Haftarah reading, no more pages on the high holidays, no more pages on Yontif, no more pages on Shabbos. So before you all resign your memberships, let me first explain why I begin with such a provocative proposal. First, there's a bit of a personal perspective here. I think if you asked most rabbis, I would not be alone in saying that one of the most loathsome responsibilities that a rabbi has in the course of the service is calling pages. It may surprise you to know that rabbis also have to daven on Shabbos morning and also have to be following along in the Torah and the Haftarah reading. And it actually becomes very difficult to focus on your own tefillah when at the same time you're worried always in the back of your head when the next time is you're going to have to call a page, and do you know the page that you're going to have to call? Are you going to have it handy? Are you going to delay the service? Your kavanah, your focus, your attention, and your prayer gets distracted. The other part of this is that page calling, to be quite honest, is a little bit degrading. The feeling is a bit degrading. I remember a few years back when I was here alone, how once I told the shul president that I was in a couple of weeks going to take a Shabbat off and that I had already secured so-and-so who volunteered to give the sermon that Shabbat. And the president's response to me was, "Yes, Rabbi, but who's going to call the pages for the service if you're not here?" I think he was joking. But you know what they say, behind every joke, there's a little bit of truth. Conservative rabbis, in keeping with the general respect and reverence for the role that has existed throughout Jewish history, actually need a significant amount of education and training in order to be ordained as a rabbi. Our rabbinical schools, the Jewish Theological Seminary, the American Jewish University, requires all applicants to have an undergraduate degree, and in the course of 5 years of study, we're expected to learn things like Hebrew and Aramaic and Chumash and Mefarshim and Talmud and Midrash and Halacha and contemporary responsa, etc., etc., etc. It takes 5 years of study, formal and informal. Medical school takes 4 years of study. Now, doctors and most professionals tend to relegate easier tasks to others so that they can concentrate on more challenging matters. The rabbi calling pages is not something that ever existed before Judaism in America, probably taken from other religions around us and the way they ran church services. That in itself does not make it problematic, but it does maybe give us a chance to reevaluate whether assigning that responsibility to the rabbi was an appropriate synagogue innovation. Something tells me that we might better promote the rabbinate and inculcate a deeper respect for rabbis if the rabbi's main function at the Shabbat morning service was calling page numbers. But this actually is not my main motivation for promoting this change. It's just a kvetch that we all feel before Pesach. My main motivation for submitting this proposal has nothing to do with me and everything to do with the congregation itself. In my own life, when I started to take Judaism more seriously and began davening regularly, I found a supportive and welcoming community in an Orthodox minyan. And some of you may know, if you walk into the average Orthodox synagogue, they will not call pages. Some of that is style. Some of that is that most of the worshipers that attend regularly and are quite proficient with worship in the Siddur. And some of it actually stems from a halachic problem, as sometimes calling out pages in the middle of a service can be deemed a hefsek. A hefsek means a break, and sometimes breaks, interruptions in the course of a service are actually considered to be prohibited. So when I first started davening at that Orthodox minyan, because they weren't calling pages, I was completely lost. It was a different Siddur than I was used to begin with, and it was very hard to follow along. But my own story is that the more I went, the more familiar I became. I learned how to follow the flow of the service. I learned a little bit about the Siddur. When the rabbi was talking and I wasn't interested in what he was saying, I would flip through the pages of the Siddur and try and familiarize myself more and more because they were not calling pages. And on Shabbat, I'd learn the name of the Parshiot, where to find them, where the Haftarot were, where the special Haftarot were. And eventually, and it didn't take that long, I started becoming more comfortable with the Chumash, with the Siddur, and at a certain point I didn't even need to look at the page numbers anymore. I could pick up a Siddur, pretty much any Siddur, and because I knew the general flow of a service, I knew I could find Seder Kriyat Torah right after Tachanun. And I could find my way just by reading the words on the page. Didn't even need to look at the page numbers at the top. To me, it's sort of obvious that this is the level of comfort, of familiarity, of at-homeness with tefillah that we ought to be striving towards in any community. Maybe we don't all need to know where to find Birkat HaChodesh. That's a tough one, the blessing of the new month. For that, anyone could be forgiven. But to me, an ideal Jew should be able to find mincha in any Siddur in about 10 seconds. An ideal Jew ought to be able to find Parshat Tzav in any Chumash in about 10 seconds. The more we call out pages, the more we give ourselves excuses not to learn. Excuses not to be challenged, excuses not to feel at home, to feel ownership over tefillah. By making things easy, we prevent the challenges that makes real learning and growth possible. There's actually a lesson in this theme in the Parsha this morning. Right at the beginning of Parshat Tzav, Tzav from the word mitzvah, to command, is given that title because God tells Moses, command Aaron and his sons regarding the daily sacrifice. That was called the Olah, the daily sacrifice. That word tzav is a very strong word. So our sages ask, usually the Torah says, daber, tell the priests, explain to the priests. Why must the priests be commanded? So there's an interesting rabbinic response. Rabbis say the Olah sacrifice was difficult. It required considerable expense. And because it had to be performed every day, twice a day, morning and afternoon, the priest might be inclined to cut corners in the way that he performed the sacrifice. He'll have to do it again in a few hours, again tomorrow, so what's the big deal that it be done perfectly? And so the process needed to be commanded, to warn the priests, just because this one is tough and this one is frequent, don't cut corners. And you know that the Shacharit service and the Mincha service are both adaptations of the Olah sacrifice that we read about in the Parsha this morning. The Torah is telling us, you don't cut corners on stuff. Judaism is not presenting laws so that you find the easy way out. It's presenting laws to be done the right way, the correct way. That is our goal when performing any mitzvah. I know very well why calling page numbers is important. It makes the service easier to follow, especially for people who are new and not familiar with our Siddur. It also speeds things up a little bit because you don't have to flip pages as much. You know exactly which page to look for when the rabbi tells you. All I ask in considering this proposal is that we take time to consider the costs, what that page number calling has done for our community. And I think those costs have been revealed for everyone to see, particularly during this pandemic. Because in a place and time where we cannot gather in synagogue, there are too many people in our community who do not feel capable of davening on their own. Without the page caller, they have lost tefillah. And that's unfortunate, and that's regrettable. And in many of those cases, without the page caller, they've lost Shabbat. And that's also unfortunate and regrettable. But we have a solution. Yeah, we have virtual services, it's true. But you know that rabbis like me have been very uncomfortable and very suspicious about virtual services on Shabbat and Yom Tov from the start. And if I was confident that we had a community that was ready and able and willing to daven on their own without a live stream, maybe we wouldn't have permitted an open live stream feed to begin with. If you ask rabbis what they really feel, what really motivated them to open up live stream and internet viewing on Shabbat, if they were honest, I think they would tell you that they are afraid that without a live stream, there will be no Shabbat for their congregation. Tefillah and Shabbat and Limud Torah are not meant to be ignored when a minyan is unable to gather. These are mitzvot that are clearly commanded on people, human beings, a person, not on a community. And if they are ignored, because what we've done here is create a culture When there's no rabbi to call pages, people feel incapable of opening up a siddur, then we have a big problem. Some of you will disagree with the proposal. It's okay, I'm not actually going to propose it. This is a thought experiment. But I still would like everyone to consider and contend with the assertion, which is that in our desire to make tefillah more accessible, we perhaps have ended up making tefillah less accessible. And that brings me to Pesach tonight. For the second year in a row, unfortunately, many of us will find ourselves alone with our Haggadot. How comfortable do you feel with the Haggadah? Not the abbreviated 5-page edition of the Haggadah. I'm talking about a traditional Haggadah Shel Pesach. How comfortable do you feel navigating the Haggadah? Navigating one of the most important books in all Jewish life. Perhaps you don't feel comfortable, and so you're considering tuning into a YouTube Seder or a virtual community Seder that's offered online. Without getting into the serious halachic problems with that, may I suggest an alternative? It's too late for this year, I guess, but the alternative I would have suggested, an alternative you might think is far-fetched and crazy, but actually an alternative that has sustained Jewish life for some 2,000 years. Maybe you don't tune into a virtual Seder and instead go to a bookstore. There must be hundreds of different editions of the Haggadah available in Jewish bookstores today with brilliant explanations and elucidations, everything laid out before you in as clear as I think it has ever been in Jewish life. No page color, no virtual Seder, and just figure out the Haggadah on your own. Even if you're there with a small group or a large group, you don't even need much advanced learning or preparation. Nowadays, I don't think there's much of an excuse anymore for not being able to have a proper Seder by yourself. I know it's a lot easier and more fun to participate in something bigger, but I think that's exactly the trap that we're learning about in the Parsha. The trap of making Judaism too easy, of cutting corners. Our default in Judaism cannot be just make it fun and make it easy. The Torah wants authenticity. The Torah dreams of a community of lifelong learners. The Torah wants the Israelites to be comfortable and at home in Jewish ritual, knowledgeable, confident in their Jewish practice. And I want my congregation to be the same way. I want a congregation full of people who are not afraid to be challenged, who like finding out that there's more to Judaism perhaps than what they learned in Hebrew school. I want this Siddur to be something that you feel at home with. That's why the gift that we give to our B'nai and B'not mitzvah is a Siddur. It's a high holiday machzor. At least a book, one book, that I think every Jew should feel comfortable with. And I'm glad to see that sometimes, especially on the high holidays, people come here with the machzor that they used when they were a kid. And I love that. Even though we switched machzorim, it's a sign that people say, this is a book that I feel so at home with, I could never part with it. It's a part of me. And here's the most important part of all of this. Next year, no more of this virtual stuff, okay? No virtual seders. We're going to be together. We're going to be with our families. We're going to be with our friends. When we go back to having our Seders together, maybe we won't need to call page numbers at that Seder anymore. Because if we take the time to learn and become familiar with the Haggadah, maybe everyone might bring their own Haggadah. Imagine that. And everyone will be able to follow along perfectly because they know where to find Manishtana and where to find Dayenu and where to find the most important thing of all, which is Shulchan Orech, come on, which is the meal. And when the children around the table in a couple of decades are leading their own Seders, maybe they won't feel unable or incapable of doing it because Zaidi's not around anymore. Instead, they will feel grateful that you have given them a heritage that they can feel at home in and comfortable in and independent in long after Zaidi is gone, long after we are all gone. And if that is not the point of Pesach, then I don't know what is.